Hello, and my name is Peter Rushmer, and I'm your host today of a Half Dozen Things podcast. A Half Dozen Things is a podcast for business owners and professionals just like you. Whether you're an underdog hungry for success or you're already smashing it but want to continue to level up, we're here each week for you to get insight and learning from the very best in the business. No fluff, no BS, and no self-proclaimed gurus talking about how easy business or life is. Just real, frank, and raw conversations. I'm buzzing to be joined today by Tom Reddy. Tom is an external transport manager similar to myself, and he was also recently voted an HGV Hero by the RHA. It was an absolute pleasure having him on the show, and I really hope you enjoy today's episode. So the red button's rolling, and I'm joined today by Tom Reddy. Tom is a transport manager, very similar to myself, and him and I have spoken previously on social media. And another one of my, shall I say, social media friends that I've not ever met in the flesh or even really had a proper conversation with. But I think it's great that we have a network of transport managers who we rely on and we build trust with and rapport with over social media. So, Tom, if it's okay, is it okay to give yourself a bit of an introduction and sort of let the listeners know who you are and sort of what your background is?
Sure. So, my name's Tom Reddy. I'm an external transport manager at the moment. Also moving into consultancy work, this similar sort of thing to yourself. I've also started training, teaching the transport manager CPC quite recently. So that was something I wanted to get into, and everything's going in that direction. My history is in transport for a long time. I joined the Navy when I left school as an aircraft technician. So I spent 4 years working on the Sea Harrier. And then when I came out, like so many, I was a bit lost about what to do, where to go. Ended up working for a laundry in central London, of all places, driving a van. And then I got a real buzz from it at the time. I can remember certain feelings and certain experiences. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. And then they had a few 7.5 ton vehicles. So I could see the compliance side, my very first impressions of the compliance side there. They offered to put me through my category C. And so I did that, and then that was it. From then on, it was all like, oh, okay, I want to do this. And I've worked up through the years. I made sort of supervisor there, transport supervisor. It's going back into the early 2000s, so London was a very different place. And then I got into sort of more transport management roles, going via driver trainer. I know a lot of people ask like how you get out of a driving seat and into the office. It can be a difficult thing. But I managed to sort of put a proposal to my boss at the time about driver training position. He said, okay, much to my surprise, he went, yeah, go for it. So I did that. And then eventually I made transport manager there and onto the operator's license. But also a situation many people find themselves in. You might be on the operator's license, but you might find you don't actually have that control, that continuous and effective control. So it was time to move on from there. And then I moved on to a larger fleet, again in London. Managing a large fleet for the aggregate suppliers, the big names. I don't know if you want to mention names, but
that's fine. No problem by me. You carry on. Yeah,
that was kind of my ideal job for so many years. And when I first got into it, it was brilliant. I was loving it. I had my own fleet. I was in charge of sort of calling the shots mostly, just what I wanted to do. But then again, the trap you fall into, it becomes too much. You're doing 80, 90 hours a week. Double shifts, trucks running 24 hours a day. The problems never stop. And I think there was a few things wrong there, but I was getting to the point of burnout. So I decided to step away and then made my way into external. But between then, I went back driving class 1 and found myself driving through the pandemic, which is what happened. Okay. And that brings us to where we are now.
Okay, yeah, fine. So did you start off doing external work pre-pandemic? How long have you been doing external transport management?
I was toying with it. I had the certificate. I'd heard about external transport managers. I was doing a few things for friends, which was another painful lesson about external transport management, but not really taking it seriously. And then I decided I needed better lifestyle balance because driving is intense as well. If anyone drives full time, hats off to you guys because it can be a long week. And so I started to push more, and then just finding out the industry from there really, and the ins and outs, and it's quite a difficult thing to do, as many external transport managers discover.
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely not an easy gig or fast money, as some people think it may be.
No, there's a whole other discussion, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely right. So to the listeners, Tom's prepared a half dozen areas to focus on, particularly as an external transport manager, which I think is fantastic, because just to frame this session, previously a couple of episodes ago, I spoke to James Adcroft, who's transport manager for a large, or compliance manager for a large fleet of vehicles from a corporate point of view. And Tom and I obviously share the situation where we're looking at this more from a external point of view, potentially with some smaller operators, and really being at the grindstone with many plates spinning as well. So I'm really looking forward to delving into those 6 areas with you, Tom, and we'll talk about those in a mo. I just wanted to probe a little bit more about sort of your how you found yourself with external, like becoming an external transport manager, and you built yourself up into that role from driving. So you've taken one operator, a second operator. Are you now up to 4 operators, and how many vehicles do you look after in total?
So yeah, I'm up to 4, and by saying that, I've got 3 approved and 1 in application, and we know how long the application process is at the moment. And a problem that probably faces many other ETMs is you get one operator, you realise they're an absolute nightmare in whatever way, and you may have to let some go occasionally. And so that's the situation you find yourself in. Then it's almost, hopefully not a cycle of that, but it does happen. So yeah, I've got 4 now. And as that's gone through, I've eased back on the driving. And my employer has been really supportive of that, which I'm forever grateful for. So I wound back to 4 days, then down to 2 days. At the moment, I only do 1 day a week for them, and that is coming to a close, because of course you have to maintain these consistent hours with your weekly rest periods and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. That's really interesting how you've managed to sort of crank that back. As I started Flagship and I started the business, I sat there with my director at Volvo at the time I was working for, and we worked out like a 6-month map over how I was going to sort of reduce my hours over time and do a similar thing. So it's interesting to hear that you've sort of taken a similar approach. I wasn't doing external transport management straight away. I kind of kicked off a little bit more from the training point of view, and then sort of built up the consultancy clients from there. And initially, my first consultancy clients I wasn't transport management for them either. So it's interesting about how you've gone around that. One really important question for those listeners or viewers who are watching on YouTube: you seem to not be suffering from the same challenge as I am of having a shiny head. So tell me a bit about your secret of how to not have a shiny head, because at the minute I'm in like a storeroom, as people will see, with quite harsh lighting above my head.
Thankfully, I mean, the past 2-3 weeks of that heat has been, because I'm right on the west facing window, so those days there's pretty much no solution but 2 cameras any other day, and switch between the one that's most flattering.
Excellent. And where are you based, Tom? Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Stratford upon Avon.
Are you? Oh, okay.
So not a million miles from you, but yeah, West Midlands traffic area.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Fantastic. Okay, brill. And I think, just quickly for listeners, one of the things that made me get in touch and sort of I sort of reached out to you on some of the Facebook groups, and that was that you were actually an HGV Hero from the RHA. You were voted as an HGV Hero. Are you okay to share the story on that and what happened?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. That's very kind, and very unexpected. The whole thing. This is the way this has blown up. But as I mentioned, so on the edge of burnout, I needed to step away from something that was on your mind 24/7. So I went back driving, and I found myself at Arla Dairy, near where I was working at the time. They're a big sort of national dairy in Aylesbury, and I was working there first as agency, and then employed with some of the companies that were working out of there. And I was full time, and it was like, I remember stepping out of the full-time transport manager work into a driver role, it was like on holiday. And it doesn't feel like that now, but the stark difference at the time was so just what I needed. And I was loving it, every minute of it, just being out there on the road, nothing else to worry about. And then all this COVID-19, the pandemic hit, and that happened. And then I was very much like, well, there's not much else I could be doing right now, so I'm going to stay. It kind of, all the plans got put on hold, and I was fortunate, and it's worth the shout out to the employers out there who are supportive and are good to work for, because in transport we hear a lot about the bad ones, But yeah, so I was just very grateful, and it was a great environment and experience in itself. And for the first time ever, you were seeing that kind of appreciation. Now, it didn't last very long, of course, but people queuing outside supermarkets, they'd see the trucks pull up because I was on supermarket deliveries, and they'd come over and they want to talk to you and say thank you and things like that. So that was quite something, really. And then one day I was on my way back. I was actually in your neck of the woods on the A47 at Peterborough, and I saw someone on a bridge. And you see this all the time, and normally you're getting ready to just honk the horn because they're going to be waving at you or something. And I realized this guy was outside the railings. And at that point I was like, okay, this is bad. There's something wrong here. And it had obviously just happened because barely anyone had stopped. And I just remember thinking, I better stop here. And I stopped underneath the bridge. And then another guy stopped on the other side, and he was sort of saying, he was guiding me underneath this guy so we could basically put the truck underneath him and stop him. If he decided to jump off, that would be shortening the distance. So we did that, and then immediately we jumped out, and we both just ran for the verge. Now, that part of the A47, there's no pavement, there's no way to get up to this bridge. So we were scrabbling through all the bushes and the undergrowth to try and get up there, and we sort of vaulted onto the bridge. And then we got to the guy, and it was clear he was not in a good way. And we got talking to him, but he wouldn't sort of consider coming back over. And we thought, well, look, this is a nasty situation. How's the best way to bring this to a close? And so between us, we decided, look, should we just lift him back? And then at least he's on the right side of the railings and we can deal with the rest of it then. So that's what we did. And we chatted to him for a bit, and then we brought him back down the verge to the side of the road. And I remembered something that was really disturbing about the whole experience was when we stopped and got out on the road, a lot of other people stopped, and then instantly the phones came out and everyone's filming it. And I thought, I really always struggle with that, that aspect of human nature. And then when we came back down, all these people were gone. It was just me and the other gentleman who came up with me. I decided this busy A47, which is a horrible road. So we flagged down a passing bus, and I will forever be grateful to the bus driver for stopping, because he just pulled in and said, look, we've got this gentleman, he's not very well. Can you sit him on your bus for a bit, and then at least he's safe? And so we did that, and then the police and the ambulance came. So yeah, excellent. It was quite the day. It's quite the day.
I bet. Wow, really? Wow. I think that's a fantastic thing you did. Are you in contact? Are you in contact with the others that were involved, or?
The guy who came up on the bridge with me actually runs a sweet shop out Wisbeach, out that way. So I know we're in touch occasionally, and he's doing well. And I sent him a little present afterwards to say thank you for all your help in that day, because it's nice to have someone there with you.
Yeah.
But the actual gentleman himself, because of I'm not a family member, I couldn't get in touch with him, and the hospital can't tell you anything, and that's as it should be, really.
Yeah, of course.
Just hope he's doing okay or better than he was, and got the help.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then tell me a bit more then about how that came to become part of the HGV Hero. What happened there, and obviously there's some press around it and stuff as well.
Unbeknown to me, my employer put me forward for this thing. I wasn't even aware of the award. And then I came into work one day and I saw my face on the wall, unfortunately. And it was like, you've been nominated for this, and you've gone through to this stage. And I thought, wow, that's lovely. And I'm still not exactly sure. I think I know who it was at that, but I'm very grateful. It's a very thoughtful thing. And I didn't think a lot of it. And I think I got an email or two. And, you get so many emails. I didn't really pay it much attention. And then suddenly it came through, oh, you've won this award, and would you come and speak to us? And the nice thing was, between the incident and the award being finalised, my employer had changed. So I 2P'd across to the new employer. And to my mind, it was not theirs to sort of take that on if they didn't want to, but they chose to. And that, I think that says a lot about good employers who kind of invest in people. So they invited me up to their head office, Northampton. So it's XPO Logistics. And again, I didn't know a lot about them, just that they're everywhere. And the managing director came down, and the Richard Burnett from the RHA, and they painted up a truck, not with my face on it, thankfully, but like a nice paint scheme to kind of acknowledge it. And it was, I've never, in all my time in the industry, I've never known anything like that. And so that will stay with me for such a long time, just to have that time with those guys who are all super busy guys, the managing director of XPO UK, And he took time out of his day to come down for 3-4 hours and sit with me, and we were chatting and about the industry and other things, and the guys from the RHA. So it was just a huge, massive privilege. And my partner was able to come along so she could see a bit about the industry that's so mysterious, and she loved it. And so, yeah, I'm very, very grateful to the RHA and to XPO for doing that, because they didn't have to do anything and they chose to do all those things. So I think that says a lot about that.
Yeah, no, amazing. I had to pop myself on mute then. Apologies. I had very noisy neighbours. It was very important what you were saying, so apologies about that. But yeah, it's fantastic. I think it's such a good initiative, and I think we need to do a lot more. I think we could do a lot more to change the rhetoric in the industry. And I think the RHA have done that. They've nailed that quite nicely with the HGV Heroes. What you did was amazing and absolutely should be congratulated. And I think that we should acknowledge, celebrate success, I suppose, a lot more, and celebrate the good things that happen and the good deeds, because overall it's so easy to focus on the negatives, isn't it, all the time? And
I think, yeah, there's definitely, you can fall into cynicism so easily in this industry. And I think part of what I like to do is try and push against that. And it's not always easy, because we all have bad days. But I'd say to them, it's like, it's nothing I wouldn't have done on any other day, and just kind of as trying to be a decent human being, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I was very grateful for the whole experience, really.
Amazing. Okay, brill. So we'll move on to like the business side of the half dozen things then. So Tom has prepared 6 areas to focus on to maintain compliance, particularly with the steer towards being an external transport manager and dealing with small to medium sized operators. So the first area is around maintenance and auditing maintenance providers. The second one is around defect reporting and making sure that your defect reporting system is actually working. Now, the third one is really, really vital and quite topical, I think, at the moment, is making sure that you've got a good quality contract to use with your customers. Evidence in your work, particularly as an external, potentially using site visit reports, which is an interesting one as well. And I quite like to explore using that, because that's something that we do. And it's good to hear that Tom does it as well. And actually, it is something that I've come across that people don't tend to do in the sector. That's something that's come through from a health and safety point of view, that we have used that system. 5 is networking and making sure we add value, whatever that means. So we'll talk a bit about making sure that we add value. And then the 6th area is around owning it and making sure we have a plan and checklist, because actually, when you become a busy TM with lots of vehicles on the road, lots of different operators to manage, it becomes quite a plate spinning exercise, particularly if you're then balancing that with topping up your income through training and other bits and pieces as well. You need to be quite proactive. There's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of risk as part of that. So, bro, I'm really looking forward to hearing these, Tom. So talk to me a bit more. Let's start with the first one, maintenance and auditing maintenance providers. Talk to me a bit more about that and why you think that's sort of vital as an ETM.
So, right, what I see so much of when it comes to your maintenance is it's either a bit of a second thought, or the TM isn't getting very involved with the maintenance provider. And I tend to go the other way, maybe too much. So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. But when you get that document through, that PMI document, how deeply do you look into it? Are you happy with what's on there? And does it make sense? Is it following up from the last one? There's a lot of things you could do. And particularly when you're new to it, you may not know that these are the things you even be looking for. So I've come up with a document that I sometimes use, not all the time, because generally you know after a while what to look for. But it's things you can check on your maintenance provider and their PMI reports. And I think it's missed a lot, because you get the PMI right, that's done, it's within the timescale, it goes in the file, whatever. But how confident are you that what they've done is what they said they've done? And also, how confident are you about the roadworthiness of that vehicle? Because they don't take responsibility for it beyond the signature on the day, and then it's back to you. Is that vehicle roadworthy? So yeah, to give you an example of some of the steps that I take, I always bring out the previous report and put it next to it, and then eyeball them together, because they lead in, they're painting a picture together. And for example, does the mileage go the right way? Is it even the correct mileage? Is one written in kilometers and the other in miles? Tire depths, do they go down as you might expect over a period? Maybe 1 or 2 mil per PMI, depending on your mileage. And there's all these sorts of things. Tire pressures is a huge one. How many maintenance providers actually check the tire pressures, and they're not just filling in the standard? And I don't blame them in many ways, because it's a time-consuming job, but a very basic one. But it does say in the guide to maintaining roadworthiness that is part of what you're paying them to do. So I'm not going to say criticize them for it, but make it clear who's doing them. And if they're not doing them, you should be doing them. And by the book, the report reflects that they should be checked. So yeah, and driver reportable defects shouldn't be on your PMI, really. That's an evidence then that your driver systems are not working. A lot of people pay that a bit of a casual mind because, oh, is a bulb out today, they'll handle it in a couple of days or whatever, that approach. But really the only thing that should be appearing on your PMI sheets is stuff that the driver won't see, what the mechanic's being paid to find. And you go on like this, there's a huge list of things that you can check without needing a great mechanical knowledge. I'm not saying you should be crawling under the truck and waggling things with a crowbar, but if you want to do that, by all means. Yeah, so I don't know your thoughts on that. I think it's important. And then you can, if you want to, you can have a checklist, an audit checklist. And audit is a scary word for a lot of people. And I know it used to put me off, audit this and audit that. Everything's an audit. But have a checklist you work through, and then you can sign it and put it in with your evidence that you've periodically held them to account.
So I think I'll just sort of take up where you're finishing there. So I approached the TM role from a slightly different sense as well, because my original background was workshop as well. So having come from workshop, I know some of the tricks of the trade, I suppose. Not that I'd ever condone any of them, but I know that essentially that vehicle is only as good as the quality of the technician who's just inspected it. And in any given workshop, you've got a real array of skill level of technician, in the same way as you have the difference in driver for a vehicle or what have you. But essentially, we've got no control over what technician looks at that vehicle and over the quality of the report. It might be someone who's newly qualified. I know that they should be countersigned by a supervisor and that kind of thing. But essentially, as that supervisor, workshops are paid based on an hourly basis, and their incentive is to be as efficient as possible with those hours. If they're charging an hour and a half or 2 hours for an inspection, £40 an hour or what have you, the incentive is to get that work done as quickly as possible and to get the vehicle out. So I think what you're doing is absolutely right. I think that's a really great suggestion, is checking a previous PMI against an existing PMI. I think, I've certainly brought drivers to task over defects, defects that have appeared at service. It's like, why on earth is this why is this on the service sheet? Like, if we got investigated on that would be an absolute disaster, because it just demonstrates that you're not doing what you need to do when you do your daily checks and carrying those out. And then I guess the other point I make is that, particularly, I think GV79 Annex D time, when you use a new provider, one of the things I do is I make sure I go down there and have a chat with them. And I think that's the point you raised there. I think it's vital, is to go and see and feel them. It's something that I have a checklist as well of things that I expect to go and see. So I find out what their brake roller's like. I make sure that they're, have they got a tacho center? Who do they subcontract to? If they use other people, what's the MOT lane? Have they got other rollers calibrated? Other headlamp testers calibrated? Do they use pits? Do they use lifts? How are their technicians trained? Have the technicians got ERTEC, which means that they've got current competence? So that's a really good qualification. It's a 5-yearly qualification, similar to TM-CPC. Yep. But if you're working with a maintenance provider and they've got ERTEC approved guys, then they're requalifying every 5 years on their competence as well, which I think is vitally important as well, because vehicles are evolving, right? And maintenance providers need to do the same. So I think ERTEC's really good. Understanding what their MOT preparation's like as well. Do they counter or do they double inspect? Does an inspecting technician look and then a supervisor double check before test? What's their MOT pass rate? It all sounds sort of quite basic, but I think that probably slips a lot of TMs by, to be fair, looking at those things.
I'm very big on personal relationships in the industry in general. Networking over the years has been huge for me, but to go and see your mechanics or your workshop controller, and you will learn a huge amount just from that half an hour visit. How much time have they got for you as this new guy walking through the door that they don't know? a shout out for a DAF dealer in Birmingham recently who I messaged at very short notice, said, I need to come down. There's a vehicle in there. My operators, you don't know me. Is it all right to come down? So, yeah. And they sat me down and we had a good chat. And that goes such a long way to building your confidence that they're going to take care of those vehicles for you. And so I tend to take ownership of the maintenance, if I'm honest, from the operator, unless they really want to do it. I will say, look, I'll book them in. I'll speak to them. I'll review the sheets and I'll give you the feedback. And then you have peace of mind then. But it's so important to know the work they're doing.
One of the things I've learned, actually, which hopefully might give people some value as well, is I really upset a maintenance provider once, quite early on when I was an ETM, because quite early on they'd had an MOT failure. I'd been to see them, but I'd not shown them previously what I did when that happens. And one of the things that I picked up having worked in the workshop, and particularly from some of the bigger operators, is they have this MOT failure investigation process. And I've then implemented that with my operators as well. So regardless of what the failure is, regardless of how silly or whatever it may be, a failure is a failure, and therefore it goes through the process. So I have an MOT failure investigation process, which I'd recommend. I'm happy to share if people want to reach out and speak to me about it. But essentially, it just covers what went wrong, how was it reported, did it follow how we want it to be reported, i.e. was I notified, did we have a conversation about it, what was the root cause of the failure, and what action has been taken to prevent it from happening again, and how are we going to reduce that? Because essentially, if we're subject to a DVSA audit, they're going to expect to understand it's a bit like you're having an infringement. There's been a failure in the system. What are we going to do to try and improve the and prevent that from happening again? So I have this process. So I kind of sent that over, and I'd kind of not pre-warned them. So I always suggest that it's really important that you have, and that's probably an error on my part, because you've got a business owner at the other end who's very proud of what they've done, and it's very hard for them when they have a failure, particularly if they take pride in what they do. So the last thing, you're just going to antagonize people, and I realized that sort of a bit too late, that I just antagonized someone by sending that over. So a really good part of that initial meeting is to go, this is how I work, this is how I operate, don't take it personally, but this is what I like to see. Most people, if you do it in a proactive way, they'll go, do you know what, that's fine. It's when the horse has bolted and you go, bosh, fill out this report for me because you have failed, and you're wagging the finger at them. But ultimately, it's a good opportunity to build relationships, like you say. I think that's what's vitally important, isn't it? And workshops will always have their favourite customers and non-favourite customers. So I always, wherever possible, I always recommend make sure your workshop gets paid. Make sure they get paid. Make sure they get paid early. Because if your operator is that one who drags their feet, doesn't pay, the last thing they're going to want to do is actually do any defect repairs whilst they're in, because it's going to go to the bottom of the pile because they're not going to get paid for it. And I know because I've sat at the other end of it. Plant the seeds early, and I'm not saying it's right. There should be a standard of maintenance provided to everyone, but not everyone is treated equally. And if you make it known that you're on this, they are going to think differently about you. Like you say, pay them on time, treat them well. If you booked a time, get the driver there early or on time. Do not, go in 2 hours late because the driver's hope, all these things. It's a two-way thing of respect, isn't it? But definitely. I used to have, when I worked at Volvo, there was a large yellow international fleet who we looked after a couple of vehicles from a local operating centre, and they had and at the time he was literally like a real thorn in my side. Their engineer could come out and they'd have their own process for this, and even our service sheets weren't good enough, so we had to supplement it to meet their standards with something else. And everything was like by their book, and if we wanted to do the work, and then we got paid the lowest possible rate because of the size of the fleet, so the rate was so low, so the gross margin which I was getting measured on was really low. And anyway, it was just like one of the worst situations I ever had was an MOT failure. One of the vehicles we'd prepared, we do a light check as we arrive on site for the MOT lane. So we didn't have an MOT lane ourselves. We did a check, and we'd actually started to, particularly for this operator, because they were so stringent whenever they had a failure or a PRS, we'd started trying to go down the lane with the lights on. And some DVSA testers would allow it. They'd just let us go down and that would be it, because you wouldn't have that little issue of just flicking the lights back on and there being a pop, right? But anyway, this guy, they were all on, they were all working. We drove down the lane. The tester was like, no, you need to turn those lights off. So my guys turned all the lights off. And as he's turned them back on, literally he's had a number plate bulb go. It's just like, oh, nightmare. So we had a number plate light bulb go on the lane, PRS, but yeah, this company, they deal with that as proper failure. And in he came. So I wasted a day of my life sat around a table about how I was going to try and prevent a number plate bulb going again.
Well, I guess some days, no matter what you do, transport is going to throw one into the spokes, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So I think we've covered that really, really well. So I really appreciate your input there. And actually, there's some really great insights from that as well. So the next one is kind of linked, which is around the defect reporting system. So talk to me a bit about how you do that, because I think there's some great tips in the last one.
So it's very easy to buy, your RHA or your HGV Direct defect book and pop it in the cab and tell the driver to fill it out. But is it actually effective? And are they taking ownership of that defect reporting process? And even if you're using an app, maybe, is that working as it should? Because apps are great that they give you the instant feedback, but they're also great to hang yourself with if it's not an effective system. And so it's worth taking the time, and it's a whole process. You have a policy, you meet the drivers, you brief the drivers, you show them how to do the walk around, you show them how to fill out the defect report. A lot of this stuff I know external TMs tend to skip because nobody really likes that side of the kind of down and dirty side of it, if you will. But when there's a defect reported, does the driver just report it on the sheet? And is that the end of it? If you're an external and it's a very small, maybe an owner operator, has he told anyone about that defect, or is it just getting written on the sheet and the truck's going out the yard? So that's a huge one. And if he has reported it, what action has been taken? Does he know about, any VOR policy you have about various defects? Does he know what defect puts it off the road and what doesn't? There's almost infinite scope. And if you're empowering drivers to repair minor defects, say a bulb, does he have to walk a quarter of a mile back around the yard to go to the van? Is the van going to be locked? He's got to go and find someone for keys to get a bulb and all this kind of thing. So it's all very well having a defect process, but is it effective and does it work? And are drivers going to actually use the process for rectifying a defect, or are they just going to probably, because being a driver myself, I know how it goes. If you've got a long day ahead, you think, you know what, it's just a side light. It can probably wait, or maybe the next guy will do it. All these, what processes drivers have of thinking, I've thought them all myself at some stage over the last 15 years. So you need to get to the bottom of your defect reporting system. And as a TM, particularly as external, are you being informed well on it? Or are you only seeing reports that may be built up over a few weeks that you've not cited, or maybe longer if the truck's away and international? So really consider, particularly from an external perspective, how you're reviewing those systems. I think apps are great because I get daily feedback, and my own particular method is I set the walk around limit warning very low. So if it takes anything less, like unless they do it over 10 minutes, I get a warning of a walk around completed too short. And so I basically get feedback for every single walk around that's carried out, and I can see day to day what's happening, and I can ring the driver, and these all ping through on my phone as soon as it happens. And okay, it means you're never really off the job, but at least you got a bit of peace of mind. There's just one example, but there's a lot of non-effective systems out there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that as an ETM, I think you're within your rights to make a level of noise when you go into an operator about what the expectation is on how walk around checks are done, because that is such a vital part. There's things that I think you can compromise on, but walk around checks isn't one of them, and daily checks isn't one of them. I think it's tricky because in my experience, there are some drivers who really do struggle with the apps. For whatever reason, they do really struggle with the apps, and sometimes we've got to make a little bit of a concession for those guys, particularly if we know they're often not the sort who are ready to race out the door. And I'm generalising. I am hugely generalising, but it's really important, I suppose, to know your drivers, isn't it? So you know your drivers, so you know which ones you potentially can trust and who will follow your process. So you set your policy, set your process. I've got an operator who they have a guy on site, so there's like a handyman on site, so the drivers don't even have to do them. They literally wave him over in the morning and he'll replace the bulb, and it's sort of, they can do it whilst they carry on their checks. So the first thing they do is check their lights, because if they've got a bulb out, he comes over and then they can get on with their tyres if they're if they're shrewd, they might just be longing it out anyway. You know, it depends on what day they've got, doesn't it? Yeah. And I think I find apps really helpful, because as soon as there's a defect, it's in my inbox and I know. And I think that sort of leads on to a point around charging. How are we charging for our time as ETMs? Because essentially, like it may be a weekly visit or a twice weekly visit, or however much it may be, or slightly less with some operators if you think you can, if you think that's what they need. However, on a daily basis, we need to ensure that those vehicles are going out with a proper daily check done, and that there's no defects outstanding which are that are going to be cause us a challenge. So there's a few things I do, I suppose, that I'll share that I do. One of which is I do a regular audit. So I'll regularly audit on the app who have I not had a check from, and who are my list of drivers that do drop paper defects because they are challenged. So I'll do a check on that, because the apps are really good to tell you who hasn't done one, or what assets haven't had a check on them that day. Are they stood, for example, particularly if you've got lots of trailers and stuff like that? Is that vehicle stood for the day, or is it out, and who's the driver, and why I haven't had a check? Because the other thing is you do rely, it may be done, a lot of them it may be done, but they may not have had internet connection for it to upload to the...
It brings a whole new load of problems with it, doesn't it?
It does, yes. So it's doing that regular check. And then the other thing I do is I make sure I do an audit. So I look at if there's a defect, which is, just to monitor potentially, then I have a list of defects that I'm monitoring, and then I'll catch up with the guys that are on site all the time and go, this was defected, then what have we done about it, where's the invoice, that kind of thing, so we can sort of tie everything up. Whereas that tyre was this, and we called the tyre guy out. Obviously that paperwork isn't going to be immediate, but at some point we need to make sure those bits of that all ties up really. So it's complex. It's a complex thing.
I think that's the point, is that reading the guide to roadworthiness, it's very well written, and it makes it sound very simple. And as TMs, we know that it's a basic process, that no matter your operation, you're going to have it. But when you actually start to unpick it, how many places there are for it to fall down. And you make a really interesting point about the circle. I call it like the circle of life, because I'm really sad. But you got your defect, you got your rectification, and you got your invoice. And can you tie that circle up reasonably easily without tripping over, without making yourself look silly? Or is it just too complex to do that? Because quite often the defect highlight stage is not related to the repair and the invoicing stage. They're two separate departments almost. You need to find a way to tie that up, and some companies do that through a defect serial number that's an individual number issued to each problem. That's perhaps too complex for a smaller operator. But the point about your defect register basically is really good. Did the vehicle go out that day, and cross-check it against whether there's the report in for that vehicle. Very simple check, bit time consuming, and something about that check. If you use an app, maybe the app is the same company that does your tachograph analysis, but they won't talk to each other in that way. So perhaps nag them about doing some sort of report that could automate that. Did the truck go out? Is there a report against it? Because a lot of them don't actually check that. It's down to you to marry those two up. So yeah, that's a really great point. That's the thing. It's a complex system, and you really have to start digging into it. And it's individual for each operator. There's no one size fits all.
Yeah, you made a nice point about having like an auto infringement created potentially if the driver's not taken long enough to carry out the check. Because one of the other things I've picked up on with different operators is, with the app, for example, they know what the check is. So they'll sit their phone in the cab, they'll jump out the cab, particularly if it's raining, go around, check everything as quickly as they possibly can, and then just sit in the cab and just tick, 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 and the check's done essentially in like 30 seconds, because that's how long the app's taken to get filled out. We know that happens, and that's happening on a day in, day out basis with some operators. And there's no, I guess it's like the due diligence to demonstrate that the check has been done effectively and for a long enough period of time. When you get into training CPC, it's an old thing. How long should a walk-around check take? Well, ultimately, it depends on what the situation is. As you know, I've got a company who do, they've got removals vehicles that do very light work. They're 18 tonners. They're on very light work, very short distances, and they've only got 2 axles. So the check on that in comparison to, a 6-axle vehicle that's been driven through the night, you've not had anything to do with it, and you're coming back to check, that unit and trailer, when someone else has driven it and you've probably not been on it for a week, or you may never have been on it and you're looking at it for the first time, that those two checks are going to be totally different in there, But that's something, it's horses for courses, isn't it, I suppose? And as an ETM, you have to take that into account when you approach the operator. So nice one, Tom. Okay, Brill. So on to the third area, which is around sorting your TM contract out. Talk to me a bit more about that.
Right. So this is something, and we see this all the time, particularly on the Facebook groups. If any of the listeners are on the groups, if they're listening to this, they probably are. Has anyone got XYZ template for me to use? Have you got a TM contract? And I think I've seen 3 or 4 requests this week just for a TM contract. And there is one floating about, and a bit like the Annex D, but it's trying to do different things. It will do the job, the template, but is it actually doing the job for you? And is it doing you any favors? So I going right back to the beginning, you learn about contract law in your TM CPC. So in theory, you know how to construct. There has to be an offer, there has to be an acceptance, and you know how a contract works. So why not write your own and then submit it to maybe, like, for example, Mr. Chris Powell? I'm sure he would happily review your contract for a small fee and tell you if it's any good or not. But make it work for you. What are your boundaries? What do you expect? Because your contract quite often is the first opportunity you get to set your expectations. And I don't know if you've been here yourself, Pete, but maybe you've met with an operator in the early days a bit quick. You say, yeah, they sound all right. You get yourself signed up, and then they get started operating. They're so busy operating. None of the things are going compliance-wise as they should, and you're feeling on the back foot because you've got a big mess to sort out. But they've already had an opportunity to get into the habits that are bad habits that are going to make your life difficult from then on. So your contract's your first opportunity to set all these things in motion that you want to happen. And for me, it's things like, and so I would say to people, don't be afraid to write in very specific things that suit you into your contract, because they have to agree to them. For example, what are your standards regarding communication? As an external TM, what's the acceptable amount of time for someone to come back to you on an issue? Because one of my biggest frustrations is getting hold of people.
Yes. 100%.
You know exactly where I'm coming from.
People disappearing off the face of the earth.
Indeed. You've gone on holiday, but they didn't tell you. The truck's parked up for 3 weeks. You've got a list of work you could have done in that time, but you didn't know. And all these things. And these things still catch me out even today. And so my contract is permanently being reviewed. And so I have standards in there for communication. There's standards in there that say, if I'm not happy with the maintenance arrangements, I do reserve the right to pull it out of whatever dealership it's at and move it to one I'm happy with, and that is on you, and you will pay for that, and these kind of things. And I'm making it sound very militant because these are my very worst experiences, but you need to think about all these things, not just the standard template that's been pulled out of the stat doc number 3 to say what the duties of the transport manager are. We know, but how are you actually going to do them, and how is it going to fit into that operation? How often do you want to see the operator? What are your terms for wrapping it up? What will you wrap up for instantly if it happens? And so you set the expectation and go through it with them. Don't say, look, you need to sign here right now. Give them a copy maybe before your application is approved. And so they got it in their head and they can start looking at it. And it's very idealistic to say, and no one likes dealing with contracts, but I think there's a big gap out there for people not understanding why they asked for that contract. And I'm getting to the point where I'm happy with mine, and I would show it to the TC and be happy that they would be happy with it. But I think when I started, I was in the same boat. I was like, TM contract, what? And so really think about, it's a document to benefit you, so make it benefit you and the operator. It's to protect them as well.
Yeah, I think I tear my hair out with the template type
every day
situation that we see. Well, hence why we're both bald, I suppose, right?
It happened long ago, didn't it?
But I tell you, you're absolutely right. And do you know what? I've not heard anyone articulate it quite as well as you have. So spot on there, mate. I think you're absolutely right. I think if I know transport managers who have had public inquiries based on the fact that their contract's not good enough. It's not happened personally, but it's people I know who I think are perfectly reputable and perfectly good at their job as well. Actually, in reality, they're the good guys that I've come across, but maybe they've slipped with a dodgy operator or because essentially everything we do has to stand up regardless of the quality of the operator, because we never know. And essentially one of the things that we can fully control 100% within our control is the quality of our contracts, our documentation, and the paperwork we raise. And I think that is also, when you first start to deal with people, you can soon weed them out with a good contract as well. You can weed those people out because you know whether they're going, you can sit down with them and walk through that. Particularly, I'm in the process now of reviewing mine. It's something that's an ongoing basis. As I hear about new things or something that's happened in a public inquiry, it consistently evolves and changes. And yeah, I'm sitting down with Chris Powell. He was on the podcast last week. I'm going to sit down with Chris. I'm expecting a call from him this afternoon, and we're going to have a look at my contract and make sure it's right.
That was a great episode, by the way, Pete. That was really. I'm hoping the listeners will get a lot from that. But don't tie him up for too long, because he's working for me this week as well.
Is he? Excellent. Right. Okay. I'll keep him a short period of time. He's a busy guy anyway, right?
Oh, so, yeah, and rightly so. Having had the pleasure of working with him recently, Chris is on your side. So.
Yeah, good guy. Okay, awesome. So the fourth area is around evidencing your work, particularly as an external TM, considering site visit reports. So yeah, talk to me about how you look to evidence the report. Evidence the work that you do.
Yeah, I think this is possibly an area where a lot of people don't consider, and so I'm hoping it's interesting. But how do you prove you're doing your role to the extent that would be expected by the traffic commissioner? So you might say, well, I print off tachograph reports, I review the walk-around checks, all these things, I speak to the maintenance provider, but what are you actually providing maybe to collate all that information in one place and getting someone to sign as having acknowledged it? Now, I'll admit, I started doing the reports for my own benefit, so I could remember exactly what I'd done, what I need to do for the future. And so I have a format. I work through all the main areas of compliance, and it's just a letter. Just have subheadings, driver's hours and tachographs, working time, maintenance of the vehicles, gate checks, driver licensing. Not necessarily every section every time, because it doesn't come up every time, but those sorts of formats. And then I will go through with the operator when I attended, my hours on site, where I was, whether it was at a house or their operating centre or whatever, or maybe at remote work from home. And yeah, the dates of that, what you did, exactly what you did, and any action points they need to take away, things you need them to do, or things you're going to do in the future. And it can, I know, probably made it sound really time consuming. I'll be honest, it is maybe an hour or two per report. When you're external, when you've got 4 operators, one of those every time you visit, it does get a lot. And I've been a bad one for making some notes and then putting it off to tomorrow. And as we all know, tomorrow never comes. So have this maybe as a suggestion, and I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts, as it kind of benchmarks your day. It closes your day off. When you've done all your external work for that client, you sit down. And if you're an external transport manager, I'd highly recommend you figure out a way to sit down that doesn't mean you have to be sat in your office at home, because it may not happen. Even in your car, on your laptop, whatever, get a way to write this report, print it off, and get the operator to sign it as having received it. And I've had some very good feedback from people with opinions that matter on this. And a lot of people I've suggested it to who's come as a bit of a surprise that maybe we need to do this. So evidence your work. How are you going to prove? Because people always want to know. It's all about what you can prove, isn't it? So yeah, people always want to know.
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the things I do, and I think what your suggestion is really useful. It's something we particularly do when we work with health and safety clients. We particularly do that because we're able to sort of stage where we're at with certain risk assessments, what input we need, what information we need. So today we've carried out this. Next visit we'll carry out this. What we need from you in the meantime is this. We don't necessarily talk about the amount of time that's taken, but it will say the day we've been on site and that kind of thing. And then that starts to evidence, particularly the benefit of that is that the issue from a health and safety point of view is you don't go into a new customer and go, oh, you're safe today. Because their health and safety system is always evolving and it's always building. So by doing a visit report, it demonstrates the process that we're going through. So we focus on what's like most significant first and then kind of tail off as we start to work with a new customer over a period of 12 months, for example. So that's something we use there, and there's something I've started to implement with transport. But I'm interested in people's feedback on this, because one of the things I do, how I've managed it personally, because it's quite tricky to do a full site visit report with what you've spent doing this. Spoke to, particularly with drivers, spoke to this driver 30 minutes, spoke to that driver 2 minutes, spoke to another driver 2 hours. I think. So one of the things I do to keep myself true is I have a checklist. So I have a checklist of all the different things, and some days they aren't relevant. So essentially I use a Trello board, and anyone who's not used Trello, I'm more than happy to share Trello with you. It's a project management tool that's perfectly free, great software. You can have a board for each customer. You can have your to-do list for them, everything you have coming up. And essentially I just work on checklists for everything. So I have a checklist, I build the checklist out. If there's something that's a bit of an anomaly, I put it into the to-do list, which is then like pressing, and I'll have like must action, and then like as I have time to action, and then I have a checklist of stuff that I have to do every visit, and then I tick those off. But essentially, do I save that? Am I good enough at saving that? Probably not. It's
funny.
Sorry,
Pete. Go on.
No, you carry on. I
was just saying, it's funny you should mention Trello, because I use Trello for the exact same thing, and the checklist system on there is amazing. And I have these checklists to prompt me to write the reports. So I tick off everything that I need to do on the visit, and then the last bit of the checklist is write site visit report. And then,
I love that,
because you can invite your customer onto your Trello board, can't you? If they wanted to, if they're going to use it, and they can access.
Probably not most of the
time.
Probably
not. That's the thing. You can set all these systems, and I love electronic systems, but we know ourselves, most guys aren't going to use them. But yeah, so Trello is a great tool, and that's I base a lot of my operations around it.
Yeah, perfect. I think often, essentially with the health and safety visits, am I still there? I've just had a warning come up, so I've been signed out of Zoom, which is ridiculous. I'm still here. Excellent. Oh, I've just let all my secrets out of the bag, out of the software I use. Anyway, so that health and safety visit report, I don't necessarily get the customer to countersign it, to say they've had it, but actually I think that's a really good point. That's a really good point as well, is to make sure that they're acknowledging that they're receiving that and the actions you've taken. Essentially, I try and keep an email trail, particularly if I need things doing. I keep an email trail of all the emails I've sent, and save those.
That's a good point. For the record, I've never actually been asked to stand on these reports, but I just, we go on our bad experiences, and then we try and put things in place to think, well, I didn't sleep very well that night. What can I do to make that feeling go away? And so this is my way of doing those sorts of things. And I never used to get them signed for, because it's an extra thing. You have to catch up with them. If you've emailed them, it's probably good enough. It's just kind of a belt and braces, probably over the top, but just a thought, if they've signed for it, and then.
No, definitely. I know that feeling as well, by the way. You keep yourself true by what wakes you up at night or keeps you awake at night, don't you? I got woken up. I messaged one of my customers the other day, coming up for a FORS audit, and high abs, literally 3 o'clock in the morning, high abs going through my brain. To the point where I almost fired up the laptop, but I didn't, because I have Trello, which you can have on your mobile phone, which I just went onto Trello on my mobile phone, wrote high abs on there, as a high priority to-do list in the morning, and tried to get some sleep again. I didn't manage to. But that's kind of the benefit, isn't it, away from having notebooks and stuff like that. I've worked with guys who have a notebook for every customer and stuff like that. I couldn't deal with that. So high abs, they kept me up. When was the last time everything was tested and had its examination and loader test and everything like that? Had a real moment. But you do, don't you? So it's like, what has just copped it? That happened today. Have I let them know? But have I got the evidence to show that I notified them of it? And have I got the evidence if it all falls out of bed and the worst happens? Absolutely. It's good to see that other people have the same stress.
All the time. Yeah. But, you have to find a way to manage it, because I think a lot of this is you don't expect it, especially as an ETM. There's a feeling that maybe it's low stress, or it's the easy way out, or it's for the retirees, but really it's not. And there's a lot to it. You've got to try and get right.
Definitely. Okay, brilliant. So we're actually 7 minutes away from the 60 minutes, I think. So we're running away with ourselves at item 5. So talk to me a bit about networking, finding a way to add value, and what does that even mean?
Right. So this is an episode all by itself when we talk about networking. I think the key to the business as an external transport manager or any small business, and I know you deal a lot with small business stuff, not just transport, is do not be afraid to network, but be extremely cautious about who you're investing in and who you're giving your time to. And I'll give you an example. If you spend long enough on those groups, and I have tried to wind it back because it's a massive time sink, you'll find if you come across well, you'll get people coming direct to you. And I'm certain this happens all the time. If you're not careful as well, you will end up giving away a lot of your time for free. And I don't mind to a point, but I realized 3 or 4 hours sometimes dealing with one person who's just taking all my information and stuff on board, and it's great, but that's taken away from time that I've spent on my business. And what's the overall benefit? Okay, maybe I've made that person's life easier, but you have to have a line somewhere. And the other side of it is there's so much bad information out there available, but it's coming from people who are treating it like it's the truth, or it's gospel, or it's the way you should be doing things. And I feel for new TMs in this industry coming into that, because I think we are uniquely prone to this misinformation for some reason. I don't quite know the reason. I know you're passionate about it yourself, which is you've got your own group on Facebook, and I know it tries to push back against some of it. So yeah, I don't think I would be where I am today without some really great contacts I've made primarily through LinkedIn and Facebook. But I've had to learn the hard way to how much caution to treat it with. So there's no easy way around it, but you need to network to try and grow your business if that's what you want to do. But you need to be very cautious about who you're networking with. And linked into that, when I mentioned adding value, because it's used to be the kind of term I'd hear and go, oh, adding value. What are they talking about? Adding value. What does that even mean? Is this like a supermarket? But I'm learning again now, how do you stand out as a transport manager? And how do you make the business come to you? Because essentially we're all in competition, and maybe that's why it's a little bit of an awkward kind of sniping at each other position. And I'll give you an example. Recently there was a post, what equipment do I need to be an external TM? And I made the mistake of listing the equipment I take with me. And I'll go so far as to say I have an equipment checklist that before I walk out the door, I fire up Trello and I go, check, have I got all this stuff? And it includes torque wrench, 300 quid worth of equipment, a printer, a mobile power supply for the printer, because I know 9 times out of 10, some of the operators I'm dealing with, they don't have power, and all these things. So over the years, I've built up, and I got a load of flack for it, saying you don't need this and you don't need that. But that's my way of adding value, because I can come to your premises. I can set up my sad little portable table and my chair and plug my printer into my power supply and provide you with the service you need. And so I guess that's what I mean. Find a way to stand out in the industry.
Definitely.
So be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Right?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think networking is vitally important. I think you're absolutely right in that there's places where you can lose your time. I lost a lot of time when I first started out with the business. I was trying to develop the first aid training side of what we were doing as well with the driver CPC. And, I was sort of shouting in all the wrong places, and I was networking in all the wrong places. And the transport manager groups particularly, I've sort of sat and sort of spectated, I suppose, and got very frustrated. But I think I realised quite early on that that's not necessarily where my work came from. So I have two Facebook groups. One's for transport managers, where I try and have a genuinely true conversation with people, and we try and get people the right advice that they need, and try and challenge people who are toxic in there, because there's a lot of toxicity. And the other one is actually operators, because that's where, essentially operators, transport operators, that's where the business is coming from. So I try and do that. And I think LinkedIn's a really good place for finding customers. I think the right type of customers as well. My suggestion is I do occasional lunchtime lives and that kind of thing that I do. And off the back of those, I've had phone calls from really great companies like 15 vehicles and go, you're the guy to speak to about Fords, aren't you? You can help us with Ford. Yeah, I can help you with Fords. Yeah, that's great. Let's have a chat, and getting in a position where you've built sort of your reputation to where people want to come and deal with you, I think is really good. And, I do the podcast because I love speaking to people like you, Tom. I love speaking to people like James. I love speaking to people like, Chris as well, and I learn from that. So I get to spend an hour with someone who I learn from, and I develop my skills. But at the same time, I create content which hopefully creates value for other people. Yeah. But also by doing that, I've put myself out there as someone who's confident enough to sort of stand on what they say, and will turn up every week. And there's a new recording, or there's someone else that I've organised to come and speak to people and stuff. Hopefully, over that time, that pays dividends. Hopefully, I'm yet to know. I'm no retiree yet, so maybe we should speak to the guys who have made loads of money and retired.
Well, if you know the secret, but I know you've probably been in this when you start, and you're learning so much, and you're not very busy. You're very busy being busy, but you're not necessarily earning. But then you'll hit a point, and you've got how many employees now? And
we're just about to go to 8 people.
So exactly that. We, believe it or not, we registered our limited companies around the same time. So if you're in any doubt, Pete, that you're going in the right direction, I have no doubts.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's very humbling. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's crazy when you start to look at all the different things you do, I suppose, and the different things that we do. And I think it's great. Those numbers we have, a couple of Kickstarters have just come in because I want to introduce. I've got 2 really great young guys who I'm essentially making like transport apprentices. They're going to go out and learn,
brilliant,
and that kind of thing. So it's good. Hopefully we're nurturing the next lot of people, so that'll be good. Okay, mate, so I think we've touched a little bit on the last half dozen thing as part of the conversation, which is quite interesting, but essentially the half dozen areas around owning it and having a plan and having checklists. Talk to me a bit more about that.
I'll try and keep it brief because I'm aware we're pushing on the hour.
It's fine, mate. It's fine. Do you know what? Listeners, we're going over an hour, but we've had a right good chat, and I'm dead happy with that. So that's no problem. I think it puts some people off. I try and keep it under 60 minutes because I think it puts people off a little bit. But hey, do you know what? If we've had a good conversation and it's natural, it's all good.
I think you're right with myself, because I listen to a lot of podcasts, and if I'm not enjoying it, you've got about 15 minutes of my attention. But if I'm into it, I'll listen for an hour, 2 hours. Exactly. So so I kind of wrote in big capital letters "Own It" because this is targeted more at maybe the guys new to it, who I can imagine how hard it is going in as an external, fresh out of an exam, and trying to manage continuously and effectively, because we love those 2 words, the transport operation. So you really have to take charge of it. It's not going to work if your heart's not in it, if you're not reading around the industry all the time, you're not looking at applications and decisions, you haven't got the documents, you're not getting involved with the maintenance provider, you're not meeting the drivers. All these things that I think are so important. 50% of the job is getting the drivers on your side, knowing how to do that. I know you can't learn that experience overnight. More requests lately for shadowing experienced transport managers, which I think is led by the TC. I don't know, but I think it's a great idea. But whatever, you have confidence in your qualification, because it's not easy to get. But you need, at that point, you're on your own, sadly. You need to find a way to take charge of whichever operator you're working for, because you need to appreciate the significance of the position you're in. And so it's a cliche that I try and avoid, about saying, it's like your driving test and you don't really start learning until you're out there and doing it, because that can be a little bit patronizing and put new people off. But you really do, you need to take charge of everything. And the other thing, have a plan about how you're going to run your week, because otherwise you will find yourself overwhelmed, especially when you get to 3 and 4, if you're not planning your visits, particularly if you do other work, training or consultancy work or anything like that. It can soon. But use things like checklists, and I have them for pretty much everything. When I go to a site, what I'm doing in a vehicle, how to check a vehicle, equipment that I don't leave the house without, because I sat on someone's floor when you haven't got a staple unpicker and you've got no power. Things like this, all these experiences lead me to be where I am and have the equipment that I have. And I'm confident now that I have everything I need. There'll be something tomorrow, like I'll forget my orange highlighter, and that'll go on the checklist, but so just own it. Just take charge of it and really fill that position, because it's not just some easy money on the side. If you want that, probably try something else.
I think you're absolutely right. I think if you're essentially, you can't be passive. You can't just be passively involved. And I think there's a real balance, I think, where we talk very regularly about the technical skills of being a transport manager, where, like we have in this session, we've sort of given hints and tips, and there's been different things that we've discussed. And then there is the softer skilled element, which is about how we interact with the other stakeholders around us. So the drivers, the other transport people, planners, owners, company owners, etc. And I think nurturing those skills are vitally important. And if half of the transport managers I see communicate with each other the way they do on Facebook with operators and with drivers, I'm amazed they've still got a face in one piece.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest.
Yeah. This is the other thing I don't know if it's worth saying about. Everything's publicly searchable, of course, which is a huge advantage we have. So if you ever in doubt about someone's credentials, you can just look them up. And a lot of these people who can be quite intimidating, and particularly if someone is unpleasant, I find the people who are confident in what they're doing and enjoy their job don't need to go out of their way to make other people feel bad. They'll always be the ones helping. So if you've had a negative experience, look up that person. Chances are they've been banned, or they've been to public inquiry, they're not able to practice, or they've never held an operator's license, or they don't currently, or they've done it years ago and they've got so fed up with it, they just want to be on Facebook and moan about it. And so, don't be put off, because I love this industry. I think it's a great industry to be in. It's a fascinating job, especially as an external, seeing all the different things we see. And be the new breed, if we can use that word. If we're old enough to use that word, are we?
Yeah.
Try and set it how we want to go forward from here into a better standard of the way people are treated and stuff.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. Yeah. Treat people the way that you like to be treated, or the way they like to be treated, actually. Yeah. Because everyone likes to be treated their own way, and try and work that out. I think with drivers, as you know, they're just, we are them and they are us, and we have to work together, right? So I think there's a very important that we get on the right wavelength. There's a lot to be said for training stuff. I think I can tell that you're training transport manager CPC because you know it so in depth. And I think when you train something, you do learn it better though, don't you? So one of the best things I ever did, being perfectly frank, very early days, I really struggled with driver's hours, really struggled at. So I did I started training it. I just put myself out there and I just started training it. I had subcontracted it to one of my other guys that I do work with and what have you, and he was doing a lot of the driver's hour stuff for me. And all of a sudden, I was like, do you know what? I've just got to I do know this. I've just got to be confident. And sometimes it's around having that confidence to just grab the ball. And it's what you're talking about not being passive and just going, oh, I'm not really too sure about that, so I'll just kind of hope it goes away. Actually, you just got to take the ball by the horns. And now, the guy who I used to rely on comes to me to check driver's hours because I just know it. And when you've been with drivers and, I've trained thousands of drivers' hours and had thousands of arguments and thousands, and you just end up honing those skills of discussion. But, it's one of those. I think you get a lot from just getting involved and being positive, and things will go wrong, right? I'll tell you what, I'm reading a really good book at the minute. You must read it, called, and I'm just going to overshare now for a bit, but there's a book called Meltdown. I've forgotten the name of the guy who wrote it, but it's about what happens when things go wrong and things melt down and when systems collapse. Okay. Really good book, really good book. And it talks about, I'm quite early on in it, but it talks about complexity and coupling, basically. So you've got complexity and coupling, and essentially as things become more complex, as a system becomes more complex, and as it becomes more what they call tightly coupled, which means there's less slack for things to go wrong. Essentially what happens is when it starts to go wrong, loads of little things go wrong, which is what's called a meltdown, and you don't actually know what the root cause is, because actually there's so many little things firing off, and it's because everything's so tightly coupled. And I actually recommend it for any of the transport managers listening to read the book, because you start to realize that whilst, and particularly as an ETM, I think when you're dealing with multiple operators, because what happens is when you're an internal TM and you're dealing with one business, you're dealing with one business. So the complexity can be depending on the size of that business, it could be quite complex or it could be fairly straightforward, right? But essentially the coupling isn't so much of an issue, because what you have is the moving parts of that transport system. There's one system that has moving parts. So essentially there's a bit more slack, right? So as a transport manager, you go on holiday and there might be someone to cover you or there might not. But essentially a lot of things might be able to wait a week or 2 weeks because it's just that business and you've got a tight grip on it. But the challenge you've got as an ETM, once you add multiple moving parts and different stuff happening, that then tightens the slack. That then creates more complexity. It creates tighter coupling because actually there's less room for error because you've got so many different plates spinning. And then that is when catastrophe can happen.
Yeah.
So there we go. Read the book.
And that's a podcast idea, Pete. Your 5 top kind of management business related, because I could tell you're a reader just from the things you say. But yeah, I love love reading myself. I spend so long on Audible with all the miles we do. I get through some.
Audible 2 times speed, mate. That's the way to go.
You do it 2 times, do you?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. That's Oh wow! Okay, I mean, I do admire that you managed to get your podcast done and out so consistently every week that you do, and all the different shows you do, like the Rushcast and stuff. It's really impressive. Yeah. I toyed with the idea for a while, but I just time. But maybe 2 times speed, people. That's what you need to do for the transport industry.
Apart from driving, obviously.
Apart from driving, yeah. Stick to your speed limit.
Yeah, just do your CPD at 2 times speed. It's fine. Right. Anyway, it's been lovely chatting, Tom. You've been an absolute gent. Thank you very much for joining me. Tom, how do people, if they want to use your services, if they want to get in touch, I'm not in competition with you, mate. You are more than welcome to speak to my audience. No problem.
Oh, that's very kind of you, Pete. And it has been a real pleasure today. I've really enjoyed our chat. So my company is called Green Candle Traction. I am at greencandle.co.uk, but I don't have a website properly finished yet because I'm sure a lot of new businesses fall into that problem. But you can find me on LinkedIn, Tom Reddy, and on Facebook on the Transport Manager groups. When I fail to step away, as I try and push myself off those groups as much as possible. But yeah, you can find me there. And you're more than welcome to drop me a message. I'll always help where I can.
Spot on, Tom. I really, really appreciate you joining me. So thank you very much. I hope everyone's found that useful and catch you all soon. I really hope you loved today's episode. And if you did, please make sure you subscribe and listen out for future episodes too. Please do share it across your social media channels. We hope to reach more and help more people. If you want to find out more about me, my name's Pete Rushmer. You'll find me across any social media channel and my business Flagship Partners, and we're your partners in success across your business. Thank you. See you again soon.